we'll start with Netflix's final season. As mentioned before, they axed it pretty much before I can get a final and another season. But the final season of BoJack Horseman, which is season 6. What did you feel about the show? Because I think I'm one of those camps where I like BoJack Horseman, but I don't like it as much as a lot of people do. Like, you know, so like I think it's a good, solid show. However, I know there's a lot of people that, you know, love this show more than anything. You know, so how did you feel about how the finale went?
Well, I kind of felt like the finale felt kind of rushed. But as a show as a whole, like as a body of work, I think it's really good. I think it's very rare to have a lot of like, I guess, animated cartoons that kind of humorously approach the human condition and kind of talk about like things like, you know, like depression, people's like and a lot of other uncomfortable
They try to do
topics,
better,
right?
and they always stuff up. You know, letting people down.
Yeah, and well, but and not only that, it's like they kind of approach it from like multifaceted, right? Like they kind of have like a whole arc where one of the characters wants to have a child, and so they adopt, and then it's like the problem of like having children, and you know, in like integrating that into a busy work-life balance, right? Obviously, because it's a cartoon, that obviously gets resolved and it's done in a humorous way, but it's supposed to be like a mirror that is held up to what our quote-unquote society that we live in, right? And I think it does do a really good job at that. I think the problem is like I feel like in the later seasons of BoJack Horseman, like as in like last season and the season before, do a much better job at kind of building Bojack to some kind of redemption of some kind, right? Like he's kind of changing as a person.
Yeah, and I
Because I
feel like
felt like
I feel like that was the criticism for the past few seasons, where it's like, you know, for the first 4 seasons, it was kind of like he stuffs up, but then the next season he's back to his old self. So it's like he never really learned. So it kept
yeah, well,
happening over and over again up until, as you mentioned, like the last 2 seasons. I felt like then they started to be like, okay, like we need, this is like the through line, and this is where things will actually start changing.
and I think the thing is like the first season when you do it, great, excellent. You see someone who's washed up, they do bad shit, they do fucked up shit, and they try to be better, even when they can't, right? And then they have the people around them help him, and then he even like kind of betrays them. There's all this kind of drama, but then it's interlaced with like comedy and like there's excellent like kind of dialogue that's like in like into like throughout the entire show as well. It's kind of in its DNA. I think the writing for it's really good. Although like sometimes like it can be kind of cringe, but that's kind of like what it is. Like it kind of wears that. It even like makes fun of itself. Like that's how self-aware the show is. It's very meta in regards to what it does and what it mocks and who it tries to what messages it tries to display. I think ultimately, I think the other thing is like it felt really rushed because I'm not too sure whether or not they wanted it to end the way they did, because obviously, like at least like some casual spoilers, like there really isn't a redemption for Bojack. If anything, it kind of just seems like everybody moves on from him without giving too much away.
Yeah, I
Uh,
feel like, yeah, like it all really comes
which is
down to
fine.
the, yeah. That's the
I'm
thing. I feel like it honestly, like it, it kind of almost takes away the what do you call it, like the positive feedback that you would get from like having a full redemption. Like with,
mm,
for example, like with with the the final moments of the episodes and things like that, you can kind of, I think you can obviously just kind of speculate, like, yeah, this is generally how it would go on, so I don't need the 100% payoff of seeing this on screen type
like
of thing.
yeah,
It's like,
like how it happened
yeah,
and how it
and the way it ended, you can kind of be like, okay, I can kind of assume in my head this is generally how it's gonna go, and this is how people are gonna be reconnecting to each other, and this is basically the new life moving forward. Like we don't
mm,
100% have to see it, but at the same time, like obviously since you know that, like if they just told you like outright this is the final season, and the creators of the show are like this is the final season, I think would be more acceptable. But since we already know that like basically Netflix like basically cut it off,
mm,
basically one with more or less one season left, I would assume, of basically finishing off BoJack. it kind of gives it just like, okay, you had something else planned, but it, like, because there's obviously going to be some sort of like bigger redemption, because obviously
well, here's the thing. I don't think here's the thing. I don't necessarily think that there was supposed to be a redemption. I think the thing is like the lesson ultimately with the whole. I think that they're trying to show within BoJack is that like sometimes because I think they even say like life happens and you die, but then it's like life happens and then you still have to keep living, right? And I think that's the point. It's like all these people in his life have kind of moved on. Like I think his manager doesn't really want to have anything to do with him after jail. His kind of best friend seems to kind of still want to be around him, and like the dog guy, Peanut Butter, like he's still like around and still his like kind of like his best friend now, which is kind of ironic given how the show started because he hated Mr. Peanut Butter or whatever. But then there's also like I forget her name, the South Korean
was it Lynn?
chick. No, I don't think so. Anyway, Diane. There we go. Diane. So Diane, like her character is like, like Bojack's like, oh, wouldn't it be funny if this was the last time we speak? And then she's just silent because it's like, she doesn't want anything to do with Bojack going forward. And I think that's the point. It's like this. I think the ultimate kind of consequence, what it was supposed to show, is like, there were supposed to be consequences in the end that everybody kind of leaves him after everything he's done. But the problem is, because it was rushed, it's done in a pretty half-assed way. And also in the previous episode, they kind of try to do a bait and switch where it's like, oh, he dies, but then he doesn't die, So I think that
which I think that episode was really good.
I like the the episode's really good, but I think it's very cheap in terms of like what they tried to do. Because in no way I was like, oh yeah, because
like obviously I knew there was one more episode left. I'm like, okay, like is it gonna be everyone rounding up to be like, oh, how Bojack was? And I think like and that's the thing, that could have been a better concept if he just completely died, and then the last episode was them reflecting without him being in the picture, because it's almost basically the same type of thing that happened in the end where everyone's being distant and everyone's moved on. So essentially him being around, that it's you can see that everyone's moved on,
Yeah, as in like everybody's life becomes better because he's dead. Like, is that what you mean?
Well, that's the thing, but it is very brutal, I guess. But this show is relatively brutal of how it depicts, I guess, people with like anxiety or depression or thing like that hurt other people, like having like abusive type of relationships. And I feel like obviously with Bojack, he was kind of like the main center of all these things, that like if you just acted like a certain person, it would be better / different. You can even see like, as you mentioned, like people drifting away, where it's like I'd say the past like season or like season and a half, you can definitely see like for example, Todd, for example, and Mr. Peanut Butter are basically very distant and aren't really part of the show, because obviously the main part of the show is Bojack. So they're there, but they're not really 100% interacting with Bojack, and you already kind of see the built-up distance that they have with each other.
And that's obviously something that kind of builds over time. I think the thing is with the show, like, I think it's good. It's just unfortunate that, like, I'm not too surprised that it got axed early, because I feel like it fluffed around too much, even though the thing is, like, I like the show, like, with, like, all these kind of, not even necessarily filler episodes, because I wouldn't even call them filler episodes, but there are some episodes which are just like, it's just world building. I like the world. I like the world of Bojack Horseman as well. Like, I like how there are celebrities, but there's also, like, these animal people that are everywhere. Like, it's a very unique world to be in. I think that's what I'll miss more, that there's going to be this whole world that no longer exists. That's kind of very unique in how it kind of approaches things as well. In its comedy.
It is a very creative world, and I feel like there's a lot of episodes where they do some, like, I guess, interesting gimmicks as well. So
probably one of my favorite episodes of this season is the episode where I think, like, Mr. Peanut Butter and his wife, like, come home, but then everybody hears that, like, they've just broken up, and they had a surprise party ready, but everybody's trying to hide as they walk into the house. Like that episode in particular was like really good this season, and I really liked it.
Yeah,
But yeah,
yeah. There's a good amount of character stuff, and as well interesting gimmick ones, because I think, like, as you mentioned before, the one about the baby where it follows the agent around for the whole day, and it basically you just hear the baby crying over and over again through the whole episode. I think it kind of hammers it home almost. I guess the effects of having a kid, and that's the thing. It's like the show is really unique and interesting when it does that stuff. It reminds me of like how revolutionary stuff, like for example, like when Rick and Morty, when it first came back in the second season, and it had like the dimension of the dimension, and it was like kind of a parody of everything. I like it was kind of, it's pretty much like that when it does those episodes where it's like, okay, like it does something different from with the format, and that's something I always appreciate.
Yeah, I think ultimately, like for people who haven't watched BoJack Horseman, it is a series worth watching. Um, yeah, that's it. I don't. Yeah, I think that's it. Like I think Netflix should invest more money into animation, but I understand that maybe the return isn't as beneficial for it, because I think that's essentially what happened. Like I think all the animation studios like unionized, and then all of a sudden they're like, hey, we don't want to make any more animation anymore. I think there was like another show that the creators made, like it was about like these bird people. I didn't watch it, but
I know he made another one on Amazon called Undone, which I really really like. And that's semi animation. It's rotoscoped, so I wouldn't say it's 100% animation, but it is using animation techniques. So I guess the writer of the show really loves and the creators of the show really loves I guess animation, because it really does give it as an outer world type of thing, and I feel like it does give it, since for example if BoJack Horseman was done in human form, I think it would be a very different show, and I think it'd be kind of like what people like originally thought 13 Reasons Why was, where it's like very deep cutting and things like that. And this show and BoJack Horseman is just that, since it's done in a cartoony way, and instead of them being human, there's like literally freaking animals doing that type of actions. Obviously it makes it more easier and accessible for people to reflect on these type of issues.
Yeah, I was gonna say the other show was called Tuca and Bertie, which seems like a show that's like at least in the same universe, or at least is in the same like kind of style, because it's about these like kind of humanoid birds that are like obviously kind of in the same kind of artistic style. But yeah, but it only got one season. I don't know what's going on. So yeah, clearly like if it's anime and stuff like that, Netflix is all over it, but animation, well,
yeah, because they're outsourcing the studio.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Because it's expensive. But yeah, BoJack Horseman, I think is a show worth watching. The finale, I don't know. I kind of feel like it kind of dipped, but I think it's only because it got rushed. Because I think they did make a lot of headway. Like last season, I think was about like BoJack finding out that he had a half sister, and that kind of motivated him to try and be a better person. Whereas like when all the stuff kind of comes out with all the bad shit he does, he gets like a letter from her, but they don't even tell you what's in the letter, other than the fact that whatever she says drives him back into alcoholism and like taking drugs again and stuff like that. And I don't know, I kind of find that like a little, I guess that's the point. It's like it does, like you said, you have to use your higher IQ like imagination to try and fill the gaps in. But I kind of sometimes feel that's really lazy. It'd be nice to see like, oh, what did she say, and why is it so important, and was it so impactful to make me go back and fall back into these patterns, which I said there is, which we both said, there's this pattern where he's an asshole at the beginning, and then he does like he fixes himself, but then he goes back to being an asshole, and then it's like rinse and repeat. It kind of got boring. I think it's like either season 2 or 3, like either those 2 seasons. One of them or both of them, like we're a bit like, meh, they're kind of doing the same thing, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's basically done and out, and maybe Netflix does some other animated stuff we don't know. But let's just move on to